Hi, everybody. So today we are going to talk about the hero's journey and the steps in the um, archetypal hero's journey. So I have a guided notes sheet for you. It goes in order, so make sure that you're following along, filling in the blanks as you go, and you're welcome to pause the video at any point if you need to, but you will also have access to this slideshow. So let's go ahead and get started. So, the hero's journey is essentially something that was first sort of put forward by this man named Joseph Campbell. So, he was an American psychologist and mythological researcher. And basically, what he found through his research is that the same story keeps coming up across every religion, across every classic author, every myth, every movie, like everything that there's the same kind of motif that shows up. And so he wrote this book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And basically, what happened is he discovered these common patterns and divided it up into 10 to 12 steps, depending on the source. So the source that we use actually divides it into 12 steps, some actually divide it into more. But these steps don't always go in the same order, and they aren't always all present. So, not necessarily like every single step will be present in every single story, but they are the common steps that we see through all hero stories. And his work has influenced people like George Lucas, who made the Star Wars movies, as well as many other people as they have worked and created their own movies, films, books, etc. So Joseph Campbell is really the first person who came up with all of this information. Okay, so let's talk about the stages of the journey. So there are 12 stages that we're going to be looking at. As we read through these or as we talk about them, just keep in mind they don't have to go in this order. Although most of them, I would say almost exclusively, all of them do start in the ordinary world. So that would be the first step of the journey or the first stage. So, in the ordinary world, the hero is seen in his or her everyday life. So, they are existing in a world that is considered ordinary, uneventful by those who live there. It's just sort of like typical, right? Just like a normal life. And then often heroes are considered maybe odd, or maybe have some sort of ability or characteristic that tends to make them feel out of place. And we're going to talk about various examples of each of these stages from popular movies that hopefully you've seen at least some of them. Okay, so again, feel free to pause whenever you need to. So, some examples of the ordinary world. In Wizard of Oz, you have Dorothy living in Kansas, right? And she kind of doesn't really fit in necessarily, doesn't really seem like, she's sort of like being picked on by her neighbor, etc. Harry Potter, you've got Harry living at number 4 Privet Drive, right? He's definitely considered odd, but it's definitely the normal world. In Star Wars, when we first meet Luke Skywalker on Tatooine, he's living a fairly normal life. Now, to us, right, living on like this alternate planet, not necessarily normal, but it is the ordinary world in which that character exists. So it doesn't necessarily mean ordinary to us, but ordinary to the people living in that universe that the story takes place in. And then in The Lion King, we have Simba when he is born and growing up at Pride Rock. That is his ordinary world. So these are all examples. There are lots more as well. So the first sort of step away from the ordinary world is called the call to adventure. The call to adventure is the initiating incident of the story. It's sort of what propels the hero into sort of their destiny, right? So for heroes to begin their journeys, they have to be called away from their ordinary world. And a lot of times they show a reluctance to leave, but they do eventually accept their destiny. So some examples of this would be in The Wizard of Oz, the tornado. In Harry Potter, this is when Hagrid arrives with Harry's letter, or when Harry's getting like all of those letters, but really when Hagrid shows up with it and he's able to actually read it. In the original Star Wars, this would be R2-D2's holographic message from Princess Leia asking for help. right? So something propels our hero, opens our hero up to know that there is more than just the ordinary world that they've been living in. Next, we have refusal of the call. So, refusal of the call is basically the hero feels hesitation, right? They're not sure. Do I fit in? Is this really what I'm supposed to do? Like, am I brave enough to do this? And Joseph Campbell notes that while most heroes feel this hesitation, heroes who refuse their quest often become characters who need to be rescued, or in some cases, could be the villain of a different story. So you can only kind of refuse your destiny for so long, right? Like you can't continue to refuse this call forever. So most of the time, we will see a character that will eventually accept the call. So, for example, in Star Wars, Luke refuses the quest until he learns that his aunt and uncle are dead. Um, in The Lion King, right, Simba at first refuses to return back to Pride Rock and accept his destiny after he has, kind of escaped into the jungle with Timon and Pumbaa. So, again, like this happens towards the end of the Lion King movie, right? So, these don't have to go in this exact order. Some of them do, and some of them don't. But you will see these in various ways throughout these stories. Okay, next we have meeting with the mentor. So basically, the hero is going to have someone who is going to mentor them. So it could be, it's typically a supernatural mentor. Supernatural does not necessarily mean magical. More so, we're just saying that it is the person who is like, they have capabilities that are like above the laws of nature. So, not necessarily magical. A lot of times it is magical, but it doesn't have to be. So, just don't be confused. Sometimes it will be, but sometimes not. Okay. Okay. The job of the supernatural assister is to give the heroes what they need to finish the quest, not to finish it for them. So this is like a helper, but is not someone who's going to do it for them. A lot of times they will gain, like it says up here, the supplies, knowledge, and confidence that they need from this mentor. But again, it's the hero who has to do it. So we've got lots of examples. In Harry Potter, you have Dumbledore. In Star Wars, you have Obi-Wan Kenobi. In Cinderella, you have the fairy godmother. In The Lion King, you have the spirit of Mufasa who comes and speaks to Simba. So again, none of these characters can do the quest for the hero, but they are there to help guide them. Okay, next we have crossing the first threshold and entering the unknown world. So when we think about the hero's journey, it's kind of like a big circle, and the top half of the circle is the ordinary world, and the bottom half of the circle is the unknown world. And so when the hero crosses the first threshold, they're entering into this unknown world where the rules are different. They don't know. They don't really know anything. They have to learn again. So this is sort of where they are taking their first steps into that unknown world and towards their destiny, basically. Okay, so this is where the hero commits wholeheartedly to the adventure. They enter a world they've never experienced before. It's often filled with supernatural creatures, amazing sights, and typically the constant threat of death. The outside world has its own rules, and they have to quickly learn to respect these rules. So things are very different. If you think about when Dorothy goes from Kansas to Oz, there are all sorts of new rules that she has to learn and adapt to very quickly. Same thing like when Harry Potter goes to Hogwarts or even to Diagon Alley the first time, right? He sort of has to learn these new rules and new norms for this other society, this other world that they didn't know about before. Okay, so here you go. Dorothy must learn the rules of Oz, The Matrix. If you've seen that movie, Neo must come to grips with the realities and unrealities of living in the Matrix and then seeing what's outside of the Matrix. Okay. So that is crossing the first threshold. Next, we have allies, enemies, and tests. And this is basically just where the hero is exploring the other world, right? The unknown world, the special world. They're facing trials and tests. They're making friends and enemies. So this is sort of like, you would call it like the rising action probably of the plot. Okay, and without the assistance of their companions and helpers along the way, most heroes would fail miserably. So this is going to be just like where your hero faces a series of tests, and they might just be small things, they might be bigger things, they might lead up to something bigger, but they're sort of figuring out who are their friends, who are their enemies, and starting to kind of overcome some of these tests and trials that they face. So in Harry Potter, of course, you have Ron and Hermione as his allies. You have like Draco as an enemy. Some tests, right? If you're looking at the first book or the first movie, they have that troll that they face. They're learning to fly in class. They're learning to do all of these things. In The Wizard of Oz, you've got Dorothy. She's got the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, the Cowardly Lion. They encounter like the flying monkeys, and they encounter all these problems along their way to Oz. So it's not like the ultimate big conflict, but it's like a series of tests and trials that the hero has to face. Okay, next, stage 7 is approaching the innermost cave. And this does not necessarily mean cave in the literal sense. So there's not necessarily always going to be a cave in every one of these stories. The cave is really more of a metaphor. The hero is drawing closer to the center of the story and the special world. Often this innermost cave is where the object or the elixir, that is what Campbell calls it, of the quest is hidden. So it's sort of like, this is where we're getting to that kind of like major conflict of the story. So the hero is on some kind of a quest to obtain some object. It could be an actual treasure, or it could be some sort of like symbolic achievement that the character is going to reach. Okay, so this one can be kind of hard to visualize, so let's talk about some examples. Okay, so in Star Wars, Luke and Han Solo, they need to save Leia, right? Like that is their ultimate quest. And so they infiltrate the Death Star, they sneak in, and they're going to find her and get her out. So they're approaching that innermost cave. They're approaching the object, the quest, the goal that they have. Okay, in Harry Potter, if you've seen the first book or seen the first movie or read the first book, you know that their goal is to save the Sorcerer's Stone from Snape, is who they think that they're saving it from. Spoiler alert, they're actually trying to save it from Professor Quirrell, but they have to go through all of these different like protections, magical protections that have been put on it to reach it. And so that is approaching the innermost cave because they're approaching that object that they've been trying to get to. Okay, so in Harry Potter, it would be a physical item, right? They're trying to get to the actual object of the Sorcerer's Stone. In Star Wars, they're trying to actually get to Leia. But in other stories, it might be more of like a like something symbolic, like maybe someone is trying to overcome something that they're personally dealing with, or maybe someone is trying to like get knowledge for their society or something like that. It doesn't have to be a physical object. Okay, the 8th stage of the journey is the supreme ordeal. So this is where the hero faces the greatest challenge yet. And experiences death and rebirth. So death is metaphorical. We don't necessarily mean here that the hero dies, but what we mean is that the hero's prior identity sort of dies and goes away, and they are sort of reborn into this new self, like into their hero self, into who they were meant to truly be. So this is really kind of like the climax of a story. If you think about like a traditional story, this would be sort of like the climax where that's sort of like that do or die moment for the character. Again, it's not always going to be in this order. So sometimes in some stories it might be somewhere else, but this is where the character sort of leaves behind who they were before and takes on their new identity as the hero of their story. So in Star Wars, this could be like when they're blowing up the Death Star. In The Wizard of Oz, it's where they defeat the Wicked Witch. In Harry Potter, it would be like when Harry actually like reaches the Sorcerer's Stone and so on. Next, we have the reward. So the reward is where the hero experiences the consequences of surviving that death. And again, that death is metaphorical. It doesn't have to be a true death. But, they experience the consequences of being sort of reborn as their new self with their strength. It's a reward for the hero's endurance and strength and for, accomplishing whatever task it was. So in Harry Potter, it's where he discovers that the Sorcerer's Stone has appeared in his pocket after passing through all of the barriers. And the mirror that he looks in plops it in his pocket because it knows that he's not going to use it for ill. So he sort of earned it. In Spider-Man, it's like where Spider-Man saves Mary Jane and is able to, kind of feel that reward from helping in that situation. The road back is the next stage. So this is we're sort of starting to exit out of the special world and head back towards the ordinary world. This is where the hero returns to the ordinary world or continues to an ultimate destination. So there are some examples where they don't actually go home, but they go on to a new destination. It's not always a smooth journey, though. So I know we read a little bit of the Odyssey earlier in the year. Odysseus faces a lot of trials and tribulations on his way home. So the road back is not always smooth. There can be more conflicts and more tests and things on the way home. Okay, so this would be Harry has the stone in his pocket, but now he has to face Professor Quirrell and try to survive that ordeal. This is when Simba returns to Pride Rock. Nala has convinced him to come back, but of course he still has to face his uncle. So the road back does not mean that the story is over. Next, we have the resurrection. So the resurrection is when the hero emerges from the special world fundamentally changed by their experiences. So they have now left the special world and they are back into the ordinary world, but they are back as their heroic self, their true self. Success on the hero's journey has been life-changing for them and often for many others. And by achieving victory, they have somehow either changed or saved their original world. So maybe there was something wrong in the original world and they have changed it. Or maybe there was something good that was being threatened and they have preserved it. So for example, this would be like when Simba defeats Scar, right? And he is able to save his ordinary world. If you're familiar at all with The Lord of the Rings, after Frodo has gone to Mordor and the ring has been thrown into the fires of Mount Doom, he saves Middle-earth and he comes back. He's in Rivendell and sort of awakens and all of his friends are there and so on. So he has saved Middle-earth. And then finally, the last stage of the journey is return with elixir. And remember, the elixir is like the object that the hero was pursuing in their quest. And remember that can be a physical, tangible item, or it can be a metaphorical, symbolic item, or like a feeling or, a solution or something like that. So they bring with them the object of their quest, which they use to better the ordinary world in some way. Could be knowledge, could be a cure, could be some kind of protection, or could be an actual physical object, just depending on what the story is. So for Spider-Man, this is like Peter just basically embraces his role as Spider-Man. He's happy to protect the city. He finally feels comfortable with his role. So if you've seen like the original Spider-Man movie, like throughout the whole thing, he's very unsure of if he wants to be a hero or not. And by the end of the movie, his elixir that he has gained is sort of like that self-confidence to know that this is what he's going to do and this is what he's like meant to do. In Harry Potter, this would be Harry returning to Privet Drive, and what he comes back with is just sort of that knowledge and confidence that he belongs at Hogwarts, right? He's been wanting for the whole book, from the beginning, he wants to know that he belongs somewhere, and like that he is meant for something greater, and he knows that now, and so he's able to come back and like that's sort of his elixir. It's sort of that personal, symbolic kind of thing. It's not like a physical object in that case either. Here are some archetypes. I know this isn't on your notes list, but I would encourage you to write it down. These are also things that Joseph Campbell talked about. The hero is someone who is willing to sacrifice his own needs on behalf of others. And I should just say, archetypes are sort of like the patterns of characters or the types of characters that we see in heroic stories frequently. The mentor, those are all the characters who teach and protect heroes and give them gifts, whether those are physical or mental. The threshold guardian is a menacing face to the hero, but if understood, they can be overcome. So this is sort of like that sort of first thing that the hero has to overcome to cross that first threshold. The herald is a force that brings a new challenge to the hero. Shapeshifters are characters who change constantly from the hero's point of view. So maybe sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not. Shadow is a character who represents the energy of the darker side. An ally is someone who travels with the hero throughout the journey, serves a variety of functions. And then there's the trickster, who embodies mischief and the desire for change. So please make sure that you have all these notes down. Let me know if you have any questions and turn in your guided notes when you are finished.